The black habit spread across the Kansas prairie like a dark stain against the pale earth. She fell hard, breath tearing out of her chest as if ripped loose. For one frozen, terrible second, she just lay there, dust clinging to the skin of one bare leg showing through torn fabric. Her hands shook so violently she could barely push herself up. Evelyn had been running since before the sun even considered rising. Running from a man who wore a cross but carried a razor. Father Silas? He had called it a cleansing. He said her soul needed correction, that the town would witness her glorious redemption, but she'd seen the rope first, then the glint of the blade. And in that terrifying moment she knew exactly what kind of punishment hid behind those holy words. So she ran. Now the sun burned straight down from a white, merciless sky. Her throat felt cracked and raw, every breath scraping like broken glass. Her legs, which had carried her for miles, finally gave out. She collapsed face first into the dirt, every muscle screaming. She was done. She waited, bracing for the hands that would surely grab her, drag her back. Instead she heard hoofbeats, slow, heavy, and very, very close. Panic surged through her like fire. She tried to move, dragging herself forward with her elbows, whispering broken prayers that God didn't seem to hear anymore. The horse stopped right beside her. Boots hit the ground with a soft thud. A man knelt, his shadow falling over her face, a brief respite from the burning sun. A hand gently touched her leg, checking for injury. Fear, raw and primal, exploded out of her. "If you shave me, God will kill you," she screamed, her voice a shredded mess. The man froze. His name was Thomas McGraw, a quiet rancher just riding back from town. He stared at the trembling nun, his mind reeling with confusion and shock. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said softly, raising both hands to show he was unarmed. "You're safe," but her body wouldn't listen. It shook so badly she couldn't even find the strength to cry. "Please, don't take me back," she begged. "Back to where?" he asked, his voice low and calm. Her answer was a choked whisper. "To the man with the razor." Something cold and hard settled in Thomas's chest. He didn't need to hear another word. He lifted her carefully into his arms, her body feeling as light as a broken bird. "I'm taking you somewhere safe," he said, his tone firm, a promise. She passed out against his shoulder as he lifted her onto his horse and turned, not back toward the town, but toward his own land. Inside the small, rustic ranch house, Thomas laid her on the spare bed. He was gentle, giving her water in slow, careful sips until the color started to return to her face. When her eyes finally fluttered open, they were filled with a quiet, deep-seated terror. "You're safe here," he told her again, letting the words sink in. That night, with only the soft glow of an oil lamp pushing back the darkness, Evelyn told him everything. Her voice was barely a whisper, but her words painted a horrifying picture. She spoke of how Father Silas chose the girls no one would defend, the orphans, the outcasts. How he spoke of sign while his eyes lingered too long, in places they should never have been. She described how he used guilt as a leash and faith as a blade, twisting scripture into a weapon. When she had finally refused his private counsel, he decided to make her an example, a public shaming. "He sent Cole after me," she whispered, the name tasting like ash in her mouth. "He's the one who does his dirty work if he finds me. I won't survive?" Thomas looked toward the dark window, out at the vast, empty prairie. His jaw was tight, a muscle flexing in his cheek. "I won't hand you back," he said, his voice a low rumble. Not to any man. For the first time since she fled the church, Evelyn allowed herself to take a full, deep breath. But she knew this wasn't over. Somewhere out there, beyond the safety of the ranch, dust was already rising. Morning came too quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like the calm before a storm. Thomas stood on the porch, nursing a cup of hot coffee when he saw them. Two riders approaching, stark against the sunrise. One wore the black robes of a priest. The other, even from a distance, rode with a crooked, confident grin that sent a shiver down his spine. Evelyn stepped out onto the porch beside him and went pale. "That's him," she breathed. "That's Cole." Father Silas dismounted slowly, every movement practiced and deliberate. His smile was calm, polished, the smile of a man who believed he held all the power. "I've come for what belongs to the church," he said smoothly, his eyes fixed on Evelyn. Evelyn, trembling but resolute, stepped forward. "I'm not yours," she declared, her voice stronger than she felt. Silas didn't even flinch. He simply nodded toward Cole, and Cole lunged. Thomas moved without thinking. Instinct took over. He grabbed Cole's arm just as a fist smashed into his face. Pain exploded across his jaw, bright and sharp. Another punch slammed into his ribs, stealing his breath. He staggered back, but he didn't fall. He grounded himself, drew back, and swung once. A solid, heavy punch that connected with a sickening crack. Cole hit the dirt and stayed there. Suddenly the yard was full of motion. Ranch hands, drawn by the commotion, rushed in from the barn and the bunkhouse, holding pitchforks and old rifles. The odds had changed. Silas backed up, his calm mask finally cracking, his eyes turning cold and venomous. "You'll answer to the law for this, McGraw," he spat. Thomas wiped a smear of blood from his mouth. "Good," he said, his voice flat and dangerous. "So will you." Dodge City gathered like a storm cloud, buzzing with rumor and speculation. Father Silas stood before the sheriff, looking as calm and pious as stone, ready to spin his tale of a deluded nun and a violent rancher. The town waited for him to speak, to pass his judgment. But Evelyn stepped forward first. Her voice was quiet, but it carried across the tense silence. She told them everything. About the secret night meetings, the threats whispered in the confessional, the razor raised like an instrument of judgment, the punishment that was never about redemption, but about spectacle and power. As she spoke, the crowd shifted. A ripple of recognition went through them. A widow, whose own daughter had mysteriously left town months ago, spoke up. Then another woman, then another. One by one, stories that had been buried in shame and fear came to light. The pattern of abuse, of manipulation, of power wielded like a club became impossible to ignore. The sheriff's voice finally cut through the murmurs of the crowd, hard and final. "You're done here, Silas." By sunset, the man who once ruled the town from the pulpit stood stripped of his power, his holy words exposed as nothing but empty lies. Back at the ranch, time finally seemed to slow down. The frantic rhythm of fear was replaced by the steady beat of a new life. One afternoon, Evelyn took a pair of scissors and cut her own hair, not in shame as Silas had intended, but in freedom. The long strands fell to the floor, and with them, the last remnants of the woman she had been forced to be. "I still believe," she told Thomas one night, as they sat on the porch watching the stars blanket the prairie. "I just won't let broken men speak for God anymore." They were married the following spring, in a simple ceremony under the wide-open Kansas sky. For years afterward, folks in that part of the country still spoke of the nun who ran and the rancher who stood his ground. They didn't tell it as a scandal. They told it as proof that sometimes courage doesn't come from a pulpit. Sometimes it arrives on horseback, offering a hand when you've fallen, and showing you that the strongest faith is the faith you have in yourself and in the goodness of others.